This is the Stein Seedcast. I'm your host, David Thompson. Join me as we visit with growers, agronomists, seed experts, and other industry professionals about seed, agronomy, and the business of farming. Hello, and welcome to the Stein Seedcast. I'm David Thompson, National Marketing and Sales Director for Stein Seed Company. Today, we welcome to the Seedcast the Honorable Tom Vilsack, former Iowa Governor and U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, and the current CEO of the World Food Prize. Thanks for joining us today, Governor.
Well, it's great to be with you.
Governor Vilsack has worn many hats during his time in public service, and we're so fortunate to have him on the show today. He's going to discuss his background in the industry, how agriculture has evolved through the years from his perspective, and some of his goals as the CEO of the World Food Prize. So, let's get started. So, Governor Vilsack, thanks for joining us. Again, as I mentioned at the outset, you've had a long career in public service from, 2 terms as governor of Iowa and 2 terms as U.S. Secretary of Agriculture. So, and now bringing your talents to the World Food Prize organization. Just curious, how has your perspective of agriculture in particular been altered as you've progressed through those journeys?
That is a great question because, in fact, it has evolved significantly. I first got started with agriculture. Having grown up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I had very little contact with agriculture. My aunt and uncle owned a farm, and I would go up there every once in a while, but I really didn't have any connection with farming. I married Christy Bell from Mount Pleasant, Iowa. We moved to her hometown, and I started practicing law with her dad, and in a small-town law practice, which obviously encompassed representing farmers, doing a lot of legal work for them. And it was then that I first began to be interested in farming and the economics of farming. We used to do income tax returns for farmers. Mm-hmm. And I realized how difficult a job this was because you could be a really, really good farmer, and Mother Nature might not be so cooperative, right. And you might end up losing money, even though you've done everything as well as anybody could do it on Earth. And then the 80s came, and we saw a significant shift in agriculture, the economics of agriculture, saw a lot of foreclosures, and I represented farmers in that process. So my introduction into farming, into agriculture, was helping farmers stay on the land, stay on the farm. I became a mayor in a small town mayor, and ultimately a state senator. And during that period of time, my focus was on trying to create economic opportunity that would surround the rural community and the farm community, so that farmers had the opportunity for off-farm income in addition to their own farming income, because oftentimes the farming income was not enough to keep the family in healthcare and things of that nature.
Sure.
When I became governor, the goal there ultimately was to make Iowa the food capital. A lot of folks didn't understand what that meant, but what it meant to me was basically converting everything that we grow into something more valuable and retaining the wealth and the opportunity here in the state of Iowa. So that was renewable energy, and that was renewable fuel primarily. I still didn't quite fully understand and appreciate the economics of agriculture and farming. I didn't realize that there was a significant distinction between large-scale agriculture and smaller family-sized operations. It wasn't until I became secretary and then got exposed to the entire breadth of agriculture across the country and, for that matter, internationally, that I understood that the system that we had in place really did distinguish between those 2 types of farming operations, the larger scale, commercial scale operations, and the family farm, smaller and mid-sized operations. And because of that evolution, it seems to me that we need to think differently about farming in this country. And so what has evolved is my thought process about it. I think we need to continue to promote research, and we need to continue to do the things that you all do at Stein Seed to basically create more productivity out of the same land or even less land in some circumstances. Yeah. We need to have that. We need to have production agriculture. We need to have commercial scale agriculture to feed the world. But we also need alternative revenue streams for farmers so that a small and mid-sized farming operation doesn't necessarily solely rely on the check they get when they sell their commodity, because they simply can't sell enough of it to basically, at the end of the day, support their family. In fact, 88% of American farm families have to have off-farm income in order to keep the farm. And so the question I have, and the question I ask as secretary, is what can we do for those 88%? How can we make the farm work harder, not the farmer? So it has evolved significantly in the 40-some years that I've been engaged with this, to a real keen understanding of the challenges depending upon size and depending upon commodity. Some commodities obviously have a higher price point than others, and sometimes you can be a small and mid-sized operator, an organic farmer, for example, and you can make a pretty good living. But for the most part, if you're corn, soybeans in the Midwest here, it's pretty tough unless you got a pretty large-scale operation. You can have livestock, but even then, you have to have a fairly large-scale operation. What can we do? And I think we started down that road of being able to say to farmers, how about if we pay you not just for what you produce, but how you produce it? How about if we figure out a way in which you can take advantage of your soil to sequester more carbon or to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions connected to your livestock operation? And how about if we pay you and compensate you and incent you for those kinds of activities? That creates a new revenue stream. And how about if we make it easier for you to take that land and maybe non-productive land and convert it into a solar system or a wind turbine and generate income from the sale of the electricity, working collaboratively with your RECs, for example? How come we can't do a little bit more of that? How come we can't figure out waste product that's produced to convert it into a commodity, convert it into an ingredient that creates wealth, creates opportunity, creates jobs? So I think there has been an evolution. And it's a great question, and frankly, it's a question you should ask every single one of your guests on this show. And every single person who's got a policy position ought to be asked that question, because I think if they think deeply about it, they're going to see that there's a need to distinguish.
Yeah, where are you going? Yeah. So that leads into, you kind of started down the next road I was going down, which is, obviously with Stein, our focus has been on breeding and developing, primarily corn and soybean genetics to increase yield for farmers, like you said, so they can be as productive as they can on the acres that they have. From your experience, how do you see the private sector and the public sector working together? You outlined some pretty good public sector projects. So how do you see those two sectors working together to benefit the farmer for the best good?
Well, I think there are two or three critical areas of intersection. First of all, none of this happens without significant research and investment in people who know how to do the science behind seeds. And the story of Stein seed and the story of seed generally in this country is an extraordinary story of productivity. I have often told audiences that when I was practicing law down in southeast Iowa, Scott Township was had some of the richest farmland in the world. Farmers were planting 20,000 seeds per acre. Today, same farm field, same farmer, it could be 30, could be 40,000. And I know Harry Stein thinks you can get to 60,000. That is an amazing statistic when you think about the productivity that represents. So I think having and ensuring that we have generations of scientists who understand the significance of genetics, who understand the significance of CRISPR technology and all of the different things that can accelerate research, and investing in the universities and investing in their capacity to have that research available to the private sector. I think very important. Secondly, I think the government obviously has a role in helping to create market opportunities. When I think of market opportunities, I think of government investing in ways in which the seeds, the kernel of corn or the soybean or some waste product, the hull or the husk or whatever it might be, that is converted into something like sustainable aviation fuel, and the ability of government to work with the private sector to create these new industries and these new uses for what is being grown and raised, and doing it in a way that doesn't necessarily compete with but complements the food production capacity, the fiber production capacity, the feed production capacity, the fuel production capacity of what we're currently doing with our crops. So I think there's an intersection in terms of market development domestically and clearly internationally. It is the government that basically operates trade policy, and trade policy can help or hurt the ability to export product overseas to customers. So I think that's a second intersection. And I'd say the third intersection is the ability to create new revenue streams, which I alluded to earlier. The government can go into the business of saying, let's try something here. And we did this when I was secretary in the Biden administration. We said to farmers, look, you can reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. You can sequester carbon in your soil. And we understand to do that, you have to adopt certain practices, and there may be an expense associated with that practice. How about if we help you with that expense? How about if we also link you to a market that will pay you, reward you for sustainably producing that soybean or that kernel of corn? And how about if we have that market essentially converted into something and be able to tell customers you're doing right by the environment by purchasing this particular food product that was made from a farmer who worked sustainably, rewarding the farmer. So creating incentive systems and market incentives, again, opportunities for intersection between the private sector and the public sector to create new market opportunities, more new and better markets for farmers. I can think of those three very critical ways of intersecting with the producers and the farmers that you are helping today to be incredibly productive and will be even more productive next year and the year after.
Yeah, that's great. So talking a little bit about, again, you returned back to Iowa and recently took the reins as CEO of the World Food Prize. And so maybe talk briefly a little bit about that organization and their mission, if you would.
Sure. I think some Iowans, but not all Iowans, understand and appreciate that something happens uniquely here in Iowa. Every October, the world comes to Iowa. We might have several thousand visitors from many, many countries across the globe. Why do they come to Iowa? They come to Iowa to acknowledge achievement in food and agriculture. To acknowledge someone or a group of someones who have done extraordinary work to add to the security, the food security of the world, reduce the global food and nutrition insecurity that exists in the world today. It's the awarding of the equivalent of a Nobel Prize for food and agriculture. There's no Nobel Prize for food and agriculture, so we in Iowa have the unique opportunity to be able to invite the world to be able to provide that kind of award, that kind of recognition. Now, people understand that, but they may not understand the unique nature of it. It's one of the few things that happens in our state that doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. We've got some great stuff going on in our state. We've got a great state fair, for example, but the reality is other states have state fairs. But nobody in the world has the World Food Prize award. Nobody. We do. So that's a big deal. But that's not the only thing we do. We surround that award ceremony with several days of dialogue where we bring those people from around the world for serious conversation about the issues and the challenges in food and agriculture, about new technologies and new opportunities in food and agriculture as a way of lifting up the conversation about food and agriculture, bringing diverse views together to see if we can create consensus around the important issues involving food and agriculture globally and domestically. So we are a convening organization. We have a series of dialogues, not just in October, but we also had one recently. You were in attendance in D.C., Washington, D.C., as part of an effort to lift up the Nobel laureate and Food Prize laureate letter that was issued by 153 laureates, essentially saying, look, we've got 733 million people who are food insecure in the world today. We have 1 out of every 10 people who is malnourished. You can be fed, but not necessarily fed well. And we've got 60 million kids under the age of 5 that are stunted. World, wake up. We got to do something about this. 85% of the world's conflict areas are also food insecure areas. So if you solve the food insecurity challenge, you're going to significantly reduce the risk of conflict and war. So it's a big deal. And these laureates were basically saying, we've got to accelerate our game here because we've got a massive challenge today, but it's going to be even greater in the future because of climate, making it more difficult to grow and to raise and to produce. And it's also a result of an increased world population.
Sure.
We're going to go from 8 billion to 10 billion in the wink of an eye. So it's a serious challenge, right? So we convene and we dialogue and we elevate and we encourage people to think seriously about these issues. We also inspire. We've got a series of youth institutes, 36 of them actually this year, in over 20 states around the country, the U.S., and a number of countries. We've got some virtual meetings as well, where we bring young people in high school and we say, look, pick a country, pick a region of the world. Tell us about that country. What food insecurity challenges and nutrition insecurity challenges do they face? What's your solution, 17, 18-year-old or 13-year-old or in 8th grade or 9th grade? What is your solution to this? We make them present their solutions in front of a bunch of folks. I mean, it's a great learning experience. But we say to them, you know what, if you do this and you write that paper and you make that presentation and you go to Iowa State University, well, by golly, you're going to get a little bit of a scholarship to reduce the cost of college. So it's a really big deal. We take the best of those presenters, and it'll be several thousand young people that will participate in these youth institutes. And we say, how about you come to Iowa in October and be part of the Borlaug dialogues, those discussions that are going to take place before the awarding of the World Food Prize? How about if we recognize the importance of you being in the room with the ministers and with the secretaries of agriculture and with government leaders and the private sector leaders, so that you can understand that can be you in the future. So it's an inspirational opportunity for the young people. And then finally, we also elevate and reward innovation. We know that innovation is critically important to meeting the challenges of food and nutrition insecurity. And so we have our Innovate for Impact Award, where we essentially say, startup companies, let us know what you're into, let us know what you're doing. If it's really transformative, we might be able to provide you some financial assistance and help in the form of a prize. There's a $50,000 prize for the best presentation, $10,000 and $5,000 for second and third best. We just recently received over 380 applications for our Innovate for Impact Award this year. Wow. We're going to whittle that down to 10. We're going to ask those 10 to do a little bit more hard work to ultimately get it down to 3. And then we're going to have 3 presenters, if you will, at the Borlaug Dialogue. And from that, we'll award 1, 2, and 3 in the cash awards. So it's a way for us to also acknowledge the important role of innovation.
Oh, that's great. And as you mentioned, so I had the opportunity to go to your World Food Prize Institute in March of this year. And, I think you talk about inspiration and even aspirational part of that, I think is the great thing. For a lot of us who are in production agriculture, I think farmers do a great job of understanding they feed the world. Within that, some of us within our industry also sometimes get very focused on the right now and what we're doing. And for me, it was a great opportunity to see the larger vision, right? Talk about food insecurity, because you're from a part of the world where food insecurity is a lot less common than it is in other parts of the world. And that's an important thing for everybody to see and understand. And I think that was really telling for me.
It is. And I would say that in addition to that, there are some folks who may be under the impression that there is no food insecurity here at home. Sure. And so we have the Iowa Hunger Summit in July 16th this year, where we basically say, wait a minute, it is true that the depth and severity of hunger and malnutrition in other parts of the world is really serious and really deep. But don't forget, there are also folks back home here in Iowa that suffer and are challenged by this. And so it's important for the World Food Prize Foundation to also acknowledge what's going on here at home. So the combination of the two, it really gives you a 360 look, if you will, at the issue of food security and nutrition security. And that's what I like about the foundation's work, is it really gives you sort of a holistic view of things.
So you talked about some of the current things that are ongoing with the organization. Are there things, you've been involved, of course you've been aware of it for a long, long time, but you've been in the organization now since the fall?
Well, I started in March of this year.
All right. So are there initiatives that you see going forward, things that you have in your mind that you'd like to see happening with the organization?
Well, a way to characterize it or to sort of generalize it is we need to deepen our relationship with Iowa and Iowans so that they fully understand and appreciate what the World Food Prize Foundation is and what it does holistically and comprehensively. That's why I'm excited about the fact that the announcement of the laureate for this year is going to be here in Iowa. We're going to do it for the first time in about 20 years. We're bringing it back home, if you will, for this year to make an announcement so that we sort of remind people that, hey, we saved this award. We salvaged it. Norman Borlaug and John Ruan and his family salvaged this award way back when, and now, we want to make sure people understand the unique opportunity we have. So that's, that's just really, really important. It's also important for us to broaden the awareness of the World Food Prize and the foundation's work outside of Iowa. And so the opportunity to work collaboratively with organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations to make sure that they, as they're thinking about key issues confronting the world, that they don't forget about the issue of food and food security and agriculture. There is a tendency on the part of some folks to sort of like, oh, well, that's agriculture. That's, we
Yeah.
don't need to talk about that. Well, we do need to talk about it because it is one of the most, if not the most sophisticated industries. I mean, if you think about what a farmer has to be in order to be successful, the farmer not only has to know what to do in terms of planting the crop or raising the livestock, but they also need to know how to market it. And they need to, they need to be innovative. I mean, it's a really tough job. And so sometimes I think we take it for granted. We seem to simplify agriculture when in fact and you folks at Steinseed know this, it's extraordinarily complex. There are so many aspects of why that corn comes up or doesn't come up from year to year, or soybeans, that need to be understood by the farmer and by the seed company to be able to give the farmer the tools to be able to be successful. And so it's important that we broaden the awareness and appreciation for the fact that, yes, we in Iowa, we in the United States, believe in food and agriculture to the point that we created a World Food Prize to acknowledge the work of folks here and around the world that is allowing us and others to feed the world and to do so in a way that hopefully reduces the level of food insecurity and nutrition insecurity in the world.
And maybe just by way of background, I suppose, to just close the loop, you mentioned Dr. Borlaug. I guess briefly you want to give a little bit of history of the World Food Prize, its relation to Dr. Borlaug.
Well, I don't know how briefly it'll be because it's pretty significant.
Yeah.
So General Foods, basically recognizing that there wasn't a food prize, created a food prize about 40 years ago or so. And obviously that was a company that didn't quite make it. And so the prize languished. And Norm, because of his work, because of his love of farmers, his belief in farmers, and his understanding of the challenges that farmers faced and his role as a researcher and a scientist, he felt that it was important to elevate and to make sure that people understood the power of farmers. And so he went to the Nobel folks and said, hey, why don't you have a bag of food and ag? Well, they didn't. They really were pretty reluctant to sort of open up that opportunity. So he took it upon himself to basically say, well, maybe we should take this General Food Prize and maybe we should rename it and restructure it into the equivalent of a Nobel Prize. Now, the problem, of course, was, well, where do you do it? I mean, where do you announce it and who's going to be involved in it? Well, you can do this and you can make an announcement in a New York or in a Chicago, and a half a dozen people might show up and it might get a bit of press, but there wasn't really the kind of gravitas, the type of ceremony that would be equivalent to what happens. And certainly Norm Borlaug understood what happened because he was the recipient of the World Peace Prize, Nobel Peace Prize. So along comes John Ruan from Iowa, who had a vision. I mean, he had a vision, and he understood the necessity of Iowa as a state to be able to distinguish itself, and distinguishing itself as it relates to its role as a producer of agricultural products. And he and Norm basically came together and they said, well, this prize ought to come to Iowa and it ought to be something. It ought to be something. And they were fortunate to have folks like Ambassador Quinn, Michelle Hussein, who's currently the president of the World Food Prize, folks who were dedicated to the mission, who dedicated to Norm Borlaug and his legacy, who understood the incredible generosity of John Ruan and his family, which continued with his son and now continues with the Ruan family children of John Ruan and the grandchildren of John Ruan. That now you got a circumstance, a situation where you really have a first-rate opportunity for the world to come to Iowa and to celebrate the contribution that agriculture makes to the world and to peace. Janice Ruan feels very strongly about this, that this needs to be something that's done in a first-class way, and it is done in a first-class way. So Norm had the understanding of the necessity of elevating food and agriculture, and John Ruan had the vision of linking it to a unique opportunity in Iowa. And boy, I tell you, you take these two incredibly strong personalities, extraordinarily successful individuals in their specific fields. Norm Borlaug, he's not just Nobel Peace Prize. He's also a guy who got the Congressional Gold Medal. He got the Presidential Freedom Medal, and he's only one of three people in the country that's received all three of those recognitions. So he's really unique, right?
Yeah.
And John Ruan, I mean, you just have to travel down the middle of Des Moines and you see the Ruan building and you see Bankers Trust and you see Ruan trucks everywhere. You know what he started. So that the combination of the two, very powerful. And now it's up to us to continue their legacy, to build on it, to expand it, and to make sure that people in Iowa say to themselves, hey, I'm really proud of this. This is something we do that nobody else does. And to make sure that people outside of Iowa understand, yeah, it's important to elevate farmers and ranchers and producers and those who help give them the tools to be able to feed the world.
So, and that's a great point. It led into a next question I had, which is, how do you envision the World Food Prize Organization working with American ag companies to complete the mission that you're trying to do?
Well, there's the obvious connection of companies basically helping to finance the activities of the World Food Prize. Well, we obviously, I try to explain to folks the budget of our operation. It's really three major sources of revenue or income. It's the generosity of the Ruan family and an endowment that they set up for the prize itself, and the generosity of the people of Iowa through the state legislature and those in Polk County and the city of Des Moines who basically provide resources from government. And then there are the individual and corporate donations and family foundation donations that come in that supplement those first two buckets. So first of all and foremost, it's obviously that partnership of being able to provide the resources. But it also gives those companies the ability to educate. You know, I just don't think people fully understand the complexity of this business of food and agriculture, the extraordinary supply chain that's required to get it from the farmer's field to your dinner plate. It is an extraordinary journey that kernel of corn or that soybean or that pork chop or that steak or that egg takes to get to your plate. And if you understood the significance of that supply chain, the number of jobs that are created because of it, the support for community activities that emanates from these companies, you would begin to really, really appreciate. And then if you took a step back and you thought, well, wait a minute, I don't have to think about how to feed my family. I don't have to go out and actually raise the food to feed my family. All I got to do is get a paycheck and go to the grocery store. Wow, this is a pretty good deal. And then if you think about it even further and say, but wait a minute, what do other people pay for their food? How does it compare to what I pay out of my paycheck? Do I pay a greater percentage of my paycheck for food than anybody else in the world, or do I actually have a bargain here? Well, it turns out that in the United States, because of the efficiency of the system, that it actually is a significantly less of a percentage of paychecks for food here than it is just about anywhere else in the world. On any given year, it could be 9 or 10% of your paycheck, where in other places of the world it's 25% or 50% of your paycheck. Think about the difference between spending 10% of your paycheck or 25% of your paycheck on food. What wouldn't you be able to do that you can do? And do you ever think about thanking a farmer? And then think about this. It's like, my gosh, these guys are so good at what they do. It's less than 1% of our population producing the food for the other 99%. Holy cow. What do the other 99% do? Well, they're freed up to do whatever they want to do with their life. They don't have to worry about feeding their family, so they delegate that responsibility to the 1%. And the other 99%, like people like me, go, well, I'll go to law school and I'll be a lawyer, or I'll run for public office and be in public service, or I'll work for a seed company, or I'll be a doctor or a lawyer or a carpenter or whatever,
Sure.
Right? And all of that emanates and is created because of the extraordinary capacity of our farms. Now, the challenge, of course, is this. All of that benefit. The question is, why is it that 88% of farm families have to work off the farm to be able to keep the farm? Why can't we be smart enough to be able to produce all of this that we need to produce, to be extraordinarily efficient, and at the same time say to that small and mid-sized operator, hey, how about we figure out how the farm can work harder, not the farmer? How about we figure that out? How about if we figure out not just getting one paycheck from what you grow and raise, but multiple paychecks because of the environmental benefits, because how you're essentially growing it, and the benefit to the marketplace and the climate by virtue of how you're doing it. How about if we also figure out more ways that your waste product can be converted so it becomes its own little commodity, if you will? How about if we can't figure out a local and regional food system benefit where you maybe get a little bigger share of the food dollar than you get when you put it through the more traditional system? And how about a combination of those things gives you the ability to work a little bit less hard, but the farm is working harder so that your family is better off? How come we can't be smart enough in this country to do that? And I think we are. I think we're on the right road. I think we've got ways to go, but I think we're beginning to see the importance and significance of that.
So talking about that a little bit, I mean, obviously your organization works with agriculture all around the world, but kind of near and dear to our hearts is U.S. agriculture, right? And so I know, how do you engage growers here in the U.S. to talk about your mission and the things that your organization does?
Well, we make presentations to those commodity groups and to organizations that represent agribusiness. You know, everything from the Farm Bureau to the National Farmers Union to the pork producers to the Beef Council to the corn growers to the Soybean Association to the egg producer. I mean, it's across the board. We make presentations to those organizations and the farmers within those organizations to essentially say this award is about your work. It's about elevating your work. It's about making sure people don't forget the importance of what you do. And it's also, frankly, about making sure that everybody understands there's still a lot of hungry people out there. And we have a moral responsibility. I mean, Norm Borlaug was right about this when he said, every person has a moral right to be fed and fed well and nutritiously. And if there are people out there that aren't being fed, well, here's the deal. I mean, there's a lot of conflict that occurs as a result of food insecurity. So we are all less safe in a world where there's more and more conflict because there are more and more hungry people. I mean, think about it. If you're hungry and you're unemployed, you're not going to be very happy about the status quo. There'd be no reason for you to be. And that's part of what generates the angst and the conflict and the desire to go to war and to create difficulty. So if we do a better job of addressing food insecurity, if we elevate the understanding of the important role of farmers and ranchers and producers, we can continue to receive and get the support for those farmers and ranchers and producers that's necessary for them to stay in business and to be able to support their communities. And at the same time, we can make the world a safer place and a better place.
Yeah, I feel like there's a quote there, and I can't place it, but it's, every civilization is about 3 meals away from a civil war.
No, that's right.
Because those two are so inextricably linked.
Right. And then once you understand that, then you can say, well, what tools do farmers need? Well, they need seeds, and they need research, and they need equipment, and they need financial resources, and they need help during periods of time when Mother Nature doesn't cooperate. And they're stewards of the land, and so oftentimes it's a partnership between the public and the private sector to do right by conservation. So it's an important relationship that I think the World Food Prize, by reaching out to farm groups and by reaching out to agribusiness, can elevate the general population's understanding of the significant role that they play in all of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not just food. It's, like you said, it's civilization in every way.
Well, gosh, think about this. I mean, you turn the lights on. Where's that electricity coming from? Well, it's primarily coming from rural places, and now it's coming from farm fields, right, with wind turbines and solar panels. You drive your car someplace. Well, how does it get from here to there? What's the nature of the gasoline that's in your tank? Well, gosh, it's coming from a farm, right? Part of it's coming from the farm. Oh. Soon you'll be flying airplanes, and you'll be asking the same question about the jet fuel. Where did it come from? Well, it came from the farm. And so now all of a sudden you can see, and everything you're wearing, where did that come from? It came initially, much of it came from farms.
Yep.
So when you think about it, my gosh, there's not an aspect of any day that you shouldn't be very grateful and thankful to farmers.
So I think, early on in our conversation, you made the mention, which is totally true. There's no shortage of challenges, I think, that farmers face day in and day out. From your experience, based on where we are today, what do you see as some of the most pressing challenges facing agriculture in general, and where do you think we need to be investing time and resources to try to, mitigate those?
Well, I'm going to separate, in my mind, in the question. Let me start with the large-scale, commercial-scale production agriculture that produces 85% of what we grow and raise. I think we need to continue to invest in the ability of those enterprises to continue to be productive, which means in continued investment in research and development and a continued investment in the next generation of scientists and researchers to be able to help produce the improvements that will be required, especially given the fact that climate's going to make it more challenging. You're going to have higher temperatures. That in some cases is going to make it easier to grow things, but in many cases it's going to make it more difficult. You're going to have water shortages in some places. That makes it more difficult. You're going to have excess water in other places. That's going to make it more difficult. And so I think first and foremost that we need to do that. Secondly, I think it's important for us to continue to invest in the infrastructure of the country. The reality is, at least domestically, we are in a competition. This is not a circumstance or situation where we grow it and we can easily sell it. There's competition out there once you sell it outside of the United States. And the competition can be easy or more difficult. And if you have the infrastructure that gets product from here to there, from your farm to the marketplace more quickly and more efficiently and less expensively, you have an advantage in the marketplace. We used to have a fairly significant advantage concerning our competitors to the south. But today, that's not the case for corn and soybeans. And folks down south in Brazil and other countries have invested in their infrastructure, and they're now quite competitive. And so we need to continue to figure out ways in which we can make our highways, our river lock and dam systems, our ports, our airports, our rail system more efficient so that we can get product to market more quickly and more efficiently. And as a result, regain that competitive edge that we had for some time. And I think it's also important for us to be aware of the fact that trade policy does have an impact on whether you can sell and where you can sell and how much of it you can sell. And I understand and completely the whole issue of tariffs, but the reality is when tariffs are assessed, there's often a response or retaliation that takes place, and that retaliation can sometimes make it more difficult for our products to be sold in markets. And you can kind of help the farmer out during the short term by basically making a payment from government to sort of reimburse them for any loss that they incur while you're negotiating or while you're trying to figure out a better deal. And here's the problem, though, is that once you lose market share, it's really hard to get it back. Because relationships get formed between your customer and the new supplier, and those relationships become pretty good and pretty effective. And why change? Or why go back to somebody that assessed a tariff? So this disruption makes it potentially difficult to restore that relationship to where it was before the disruption. So I think it's so on the production agriculture side, I think those are some of the challenges that are faced. Climate, obviously, and I mentioned that. Then the other 90% of farmers that aren't in that top 10%, that don't sell more than $350,000 in sales every year, that aren't producing 85% of what we grow, aren't getting somewhere between 85 and 90% of the income from farming generally. That is a different set of challenges. That's a set of challenges of how do I stay on the farm? How do I keep the farm? How do I make it profitable enough not only for me to want to farm, but for the next generation to farm? And that goes into this whole notion of additional revenue streams and creative entrepreneurial ways to generate more revenue streams out of that small and mid-sized farming operation. That's a whole different set of, if you will, of challenges that is a little bit different than what you see on the production, commercial scale, large scale agricultural side.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, again, we've talked about your time in public service and all of the great things you've done. Just curious, as you've, been involved in state government, been involved with USDA, Secretary of Agriculture, are there leadership principles that you've gleaned over that time that you found most valuable for driving the kind of change and the kind of influence that you wanted to have?
Well, you're only as good a leader as the people that are working with you. First and foremost, you have to have good people around you, and you have to have trust and faith and confidence in them to be able to give you good advice, sound advice, to be able to push back when you've got a bad idea or when an idea that you're thinking about in your head sounds like it ought to work perfectly, but it's really a crazy, goofy idea. You need people who have a strength enough character to basically say, well, wait a minute, that's not a good idea, boss. We need to go down a different direction here. I've been very, very fortunate to have those kinds of people throughout my entire political career. So it starts first and foremost with the team. You got to have a good team. And then I think part of the challenge of leadership is to create and to articulate a very specific destination point, a place that you want to get to. In today's politics, I'll speak politically. Today's politics, there's too much of politicians telling people what they already think, as opposed to saying, here's where we are, here's where we need to be as a city, as a state, as a country, as a world. And I have a plan to get you there. I have a plan to get things better. And here's the plan. And a clear articulation of that plan allows people to understand how to follow you, right? Where to follow you, where to go, and what to do, and how to think about that, making that vision a reality. Oftentimes, the vision's fuzzy, and when it's fuzzy, people may interpret it differently, and you don't have everybody basically rowing in the same direction and operating for the same vision. They're operating their impression of the vision, right? And so I think it's important for leadership to be really clear and to be held accountable and to hold the team accountable for getting things done. You know, it's one thing to have a vision, it's one thing to articulate it, but if you just kind of sit back and don't hold folks accountable and don't hold yourself accountable, and don't have a series of checkpoints or mileposts where you're saying, okay, are we making progress or we're not making progress? And if we're not making progress, why aren't we making progress? And what do we need to do to make progress? Then I think you can run into some difficulties. And so I think it's a combination of all of that. And then, frankly, it's a little bit of luck. Every once in a while, you need things need to break and something has to happen that creates an opportunity. And I guess that's the last thing I would say. There is a tendency on the part of all of us to be focused on the problem and not see the opportunity within the problem. Something arises that isn't quite according to plan, and our first reaction is, oh my gosh, it's a problem. What are we going to do about it? People get anxious about it. They stew over it. They debate it. It forces people to stop. That they become reluctant to take action. But if you really delve deep down into the problem, there is an opportunity in that problem. And the question is, can you seize it? Can you see it? Can you seize it? And can you act on it? And if you can, boy, then all of a sudden the problem becomes something that results in whatever you're doing actually being done better, being done in a more constructive direction. And in doing that, you gain the confidence of your team that there isn't anything that's going to pop up that's going to divert you from the ultimate vision that you have. So I think seeing the opportunity in each and every problem is also, I think, critically important.
Well, that's an interesting point, and I suppose seeing the problem is the easier of the two.
Well, it's
easier to get everybody on that vision.
Human nature is, oh my God, it's a problem. It's easy to define the problem. It's not easy to see the opportunity within the problem, because you're so focused on the problem, right? You're focused on, oh my God, this is going to screw everything up. Well, okay, but you can't do anything about that. I mean, it is what it is. But where's the opportunity here? How do you turn this around? And once you figure that out, then all of a sudden it's not a problem, it's an opportunity. And people can get excited about opportunity. They're not anxious about opportunity. They're excited about it, right? And I wish I could take credit for this idea. I wish I could be the first person who ever thought of this. But initially, we have a children's book that we read to our grandkids called What to Do with a Problem. It's a great children's book because it talks about this little kid who's got a problem, and he does everything with it. He hides it, he buries it, he runs away from it, and eventually he figures out there's an opportunity inside of that problem, and as a result, he solves it, and that's a happy ending. And that's a great story, but it's not unique either. If you read Meditations, the writings of Marcus Aurelius, millenniums ago, he was basically articulating that same view of the Stoics this is what you do. You focus on the things you can control, and you sort of ignore the things you can't control and not get upset about them. Look for the opportunity. Look for the opportunity within any problem.
Well, and that's great advice. And it sounds, obviously, I think that's something
Been around for a while.
You've done it well. Yeah, you've done well throughout your career. So I guess as we kind of wrap up our conversation here, Governor, I'm curious, are there certain things that strike you, that give you hope as you think about the future of American agriculture today and what's going on within agriculture?
Well, yeah, there's a tremendous amount of things that ought to give people hope. First of all, come to a youth institute that the World Food Prize Foundation sponsors and see these bright young people earnestly and passionately talking about the future and how they believe they can solve food insecurity in a country that's ravaged by malnourishment. They truly believe they can solve this. So you can be optimistic about the future because you got a lot of bright young people who are anxious to make a difference. Then if you're really, you need a little bit more optimism, go to Stein Seed and sit down with Harry or sit down with Myron or sit down with the people working at Stein Seed and ask them, what are you up to? What are you guys up to? Well, we're going to produce a soybean that does X, or we're going to produce corn that's going to do Y, that's going to grow even though it doesn't rain, or it's going to increase the ability tenfold, or whatever. I mean, it's amazing science, okay? Celebrate that. And if you're still looking for optimism, go on a college campus in a university, one of the Iowa State, one of the land-grant universities, or the University of Iowa, or one of these private colleges, and see what's happening on those college campuses of these young people who are being educated and enthusiastic about the future. So, again, where's the opportunity? I mean, people say, my God, we're divided and can't get along and we get disagreements and all of that. Well, where's the opportunity in that problem? The opportunity is there's a lot of passion. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of desire to make our country better. So the opportunity is there. The challenge is, how do you channel it? How do you create the vision that's powerful enough to move us in a direction? I think agriculture and food has the capacity to do that. I mean, think about the opportunity to say to production agriculture, we're going to continue to make you productive. We're going to continue to allow you to take the pride of feeding the world. We're going to figure out ways in which you can not only feed it, but you can fuel it, and you can put clothes on our back and all of that. And at the same time, we can say to that small, mid-sized guy, you know what? There's a new game for you to play. You don't have to play the game of production agriculture that's difficult. You got a new game. You can be an entrepreneur. You can be somebody that can make that farm work harder instead of you working 2 or 3 jobs. How about that as a goal for all of us to work on? Now, what does that do? Well, that allows that farm family to stay in that rural community. Great. What does that mean? Well, it means those kids go to that rural school. What does that mean? It takes pressure off your urban schools. Oh, that's good. It also takes pressure off expanding your urban centers, so you're not concreting over good prime farmland. Well, that's a good thing. And by the way, while those kids are in grade school and high school, I guess they're still shopping at the local business that's owned and operated by their neighbor. Well, that's a good thing because it helps small business. And those small business owner stays in town. What does that mean? Well, it means that there are enough patients and people that can support a hospital. Now you can have a doc and a clinic and an opportunity to have a full-scale hospital in your community. Well, what does that mean? It means your community is growing. It means your rural community is growing, it's vibrant, it's optimistic. What does that mean? Here's what it means to every single American. We'll all be safer. You'll say, what are you talking about? We'll all be safer. Where do you think the military comes from? The disproportionate number of people who service in the military come from those small towns. If you shrink the population of those small towns, guess what? You're shrinking the population of people able, qualified, interested in serving their country. We're all safer when those rural communities are vibrant. We're all better off. There's a better balance between urban and suburban and exurban and rural. We're all better off in terms of the educational resources being adequately shared, if you will. We're all better off because all of those kids will have opportunity. And as a country, if rural centers are doing better, guess what? There's also, I think, a commonality, a sense of connection, a sense of we're all rowing in the same direction. Mm-hmm. Good Lord, what's not to like about that vision?
Exactly. So, Governor, to close this out, as we talk about your work with the World Food Prize, I guess if we have listeners that are interested to learn more about the World Food Prize, where could they go for resources?
WorldFoodPrize.org. Our website has a full array of information about the activities. If folks missed the May 13th announcement of the new laureate, they can go online and take a look at the video of that activity. So there are a multitude of ways for people to get interested, and they ought to just be interested in keeping an eye on our webpage, because there's constantly something being announced. We'll be having our Hunger Summit coming up in July. They can potentially participate in that. There will be a series of awards. We're acknowledging young researchers. We're acknowledging agri-pioneers, top agri-pioneers from all over the world. So there's just almost something going on just about every day at the World Food Prize Foundation. So the website would be a good place to get information about all of that. And I would encourage them to take a tour of the building. Come down to the Laureate Hall. Take a look at this amazing place where there is unbelievable art that celebrates agriculture all over the world, where you learn a little bit more about Norman Borlaug and his legacy. You learn a little bit about the generosity of John Ruan and the Ruan family. You learn a little bit about the people that have helped make Iowa a place where it makes sense to have the World Food Prize Foundation located. Why? Because we had the Norman Borlaugs and the Herbert Hoovers and the Henry Wallaces and the George Washington Carvers and a multitude of others who have contributed significantly to the Iowa that we have today and to its reputation as being the breadbasket and providing food and fiber for the world. Come to the Hall of Laureates. Be inspired. Encourage your child to participate in a youth institute that will be upcoming. Maybe even attend the Borlaug Dialogues. Be a part of the dialogue. Be a part of the conversation. And if you're working for a company that's in the agribusiness space, ask folks, are we supporting the World Food Prize? Are we participating? Or can we participate? Can we in any way support? Can we help? There's a multitude of ways for people to get connected.
Awesome. Well, Governor, I appreciate your time today. I really enjoy having you on the podcast talking about your perspectives of agriculture and especially as you sit in your new role, and just want to thank you for everything you've done for our country and for agriculture in general.
Well, it's been a great honor, and it continues to be so. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Stein Seedcast. To never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice. Have a question for our experts? Email asktheseedcast@steinseed.com to have your questions answered on a future episode. To learn more about Stein Seed Company, visit steinseed.com. And remember, Stein has yield.